So what we're discussing today, change is a fundamental fact of life. You cannot stop the onward march of change, but you can manage how you react to it. And we're going to talk today about how to cope with it personally, what can you do as a business to support people. But it is inevitable change, but you can actually deal with it and you can actually develop some coping strategies. You can also do some key things to make it less scary.
So when I look at change and I deal with it practically on a daily basis within the businesses, change can be anything. And when we think about change, we think more about the major change such as restructuring, people buying over businesses, people losing their job. But there's minor change as well. So that could be going on a training course and it has an impact in terms of the way you're going to be doing your work. But we also just think about change within the workspace. But what about change in our personal life and what impact does it have on our daily activities within the workspace? And we need to look at it holistically and not only compartmentalize it in terms of work and personal life. One needs to bring the two together from that perspective. Now, I know that we spend most of our time at work and that's where the change comes and that has a major impact. So when one looks at that, one needs to look at in terms of this continuous change. So if I could maybe ask you, Alison, in your experience, why do you think it's important for any business to continually change?
That's a really good question, Mariana. Fundamentally, you have to change to keep up because we're surrounded by technological change. We talk a lot about different generations of individuals. There's a lot of talk about millennials and how they're responding to the business world. People want different things out of life. For a business to survive, you have to be able to provide your clients with what they need. So that actually means keeping up with trends. So something that worked in the past might not necessarily work today. And even when you're looking internally in a business, what you're providing employees for their benefits packages, you have to keep up with what's relevant to people. With diversity as well in the workplace. Women are a huge part of the investment community, and so having diversity on the board, actually having diversity in the workplace, things like corporate social responsibility and what matters to people and what they want to see companies doing outside of their core business to actually support the community, support their employees. These days all goes towards what makes up their brand and their company personality. And that doesn't matter. That's true of a big corporate as it is of a sole trader to a small business. It's true for everybody. So how you present yourself is really important. And so all of those things actually influence why businesses need to change to keep ahead of all of these trends.
So what you've mentioned is actually quite a mixed bundle.
Yeah.
If one looks at that. And it's all coming from a business perspective. But if you look at the individual, your employee within your business, whether you're corporate or whether you're a small business, what do you think is the impact of change on the employee well-being?
So change for everybody tends to be quite an uncomfortable place to be. It means that there's uncertainty. It means that if things are changing in the workplace, it could be that somebody's job is changing and they might be worried about the new role, whether they've got the right capabilities in place to be able to deal with it. Somebody might be worried about whether they're actually going to have a role with the changes that are coming. So there'd be a level of uncertainty about what's going to happen. Am I going to have a job in the future? Even if you're working for yourself, there's still a massive level of uncertainty and change. You're constantly on the lookout for your client base. What's going to happen tomorrow? Am I going to have enough money to pay the mortgage? When you're working for yourself, you tend to get those peaks and troughs. So actually responding to all those demands is what makes things worrying, I suppose. And that's why change is, it's not just it doesn't just impact employees, but it impacts sole traders and business people as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. If I look at it from my perspective, and I look at when I go into businesses and they say they want to bring in change, I look at in terms of how can managers help employees cope with change. And they always say, but what do I do? And I think the question though is that, are our leaders resilient enough to manage change? And it's not big things you have to put into place. For me, it's basically communication. And I always say, have a communication strategy. It doesn't have to be a complicated strategy that you're putting in place. It can be something simple, but tell employees why change is happening. Explain to them the impact it's going to have on them. And sometimes people will tell me, but I don't know what's going to happen a year down the line with the change that we're bringing in. And that's fine, but communicate that, saying, I am as much in the dark as you are, but I want to bring you up to date in terms of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and the possible impact it could be. And I think what we as business owners, when we have employees, but corporates as well, tend to forget is that we don't tend to include our employees in terms of getting the input. We think we need to come up with the solutions ourselves. And I find that sometimes your employee has the answer. So if you ask them for their input in terms of, this is the change you want to bring in, we think it's going to have this impact and could impact your role, could you give us input in terms of how do you feel about it? How do you think the change is going to impact your role, and what can we do to mitigate those risks for you? They will come up with solutions you haven't thought about before from that perspective. But also I think taking employees' input, you are giving them an indication that their input is valuable, and they can see that you are listening to them. And because they will be sitting there stressed out, thinking this change is going to have an impact on me. Like you said, am I going to lose my job? But by giving input, they also realize that I'm being listened to and I can help with this process. So that will calm some of the stress that they're going through. It won't take it away completely, but it will calm the stress that they're going through from that perspective. So that's why I say communication for me is quite important. Why, what, how, and when it's going to take place.
Absolutely. And what about the smaller, the sole traders? What sort of change perhaps might be impacting them? Clients maybe?
Yes.
So what would your advice be for the sole traders
so
going through change?
As much as it's important for us to look at our employees, it's also important for us to look at our customers, because they are sometimes the one that drives the change, and that's why we have to change within business. So then it's having those conversations with clients or with your customers, getting their input as well, because that will help also in terms of how you're going to make changes within the business. And it might not be a major change, it could just be a minor change that will streamline the way you want to do things from that perspective. I think what's quite important for small business owners is that you need support around you yourself. So look at in terms of where can you get that support. Reach out to others and get their input. I think more importantly, if you're working within a co-space environment, there will be other people that are sole traders as well, or startups. See if you can get a network group going within that environment and how you can help each other. I think, like me, you also have a coach.
Yes, I do.
And I find that with my coach, it holds me accountable for certain things. But more importantly, when I'm in that space of I cannot find an answer and I'm going around in circles, or I'm like this hamster on the wheel, I can speak to her and she's able to give me the direction and the structure to come up with a solution. And I think as sole traders, or let's say business owners, that's what we need. So look at your co-space in terms of who around you can give you the support?
Yeah.
Are there networking groups you can go to? Do you need a coach? To know who, in terms of like-minded people, you can surround yourself with, whether it's within your family or friends as well. That could just be a sounding board for you.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, good stuff. And I think that sort of dovetails really nicely into talking about mindset generally. I think a lot of the time we worry about what outcomes might be, and we have a tendency to sort of catastrophize.
Yeah.
And in our minds things become an awful lot worse than they could be. And all the things that you've spoken about, going and using a coach and going to find a mastermind group, or perhaps a professional organisation that you can belong to that's relevant for your business, finding people around you that you can go and talk to actually talk about your fears and worries, and going through a process that they can help you with, where you can think about, well, okay, what is the worst case scenario? Is that really likely to happen? Have I been in this situation before? Was it as bad as I expected? All of those sorts of things are really important to actually just help you put things into perspective. And 9 times out of 10, things are never as bad as you think. And even if it is worst case scenario, you are working for a company and it is a redundancy, you never know what sort of opportunities are going to come along, and an employer often has great support in place, help with CVs, they send you to organisations to help upskill, all of those sorts of things. So you can find so many silver linings within the change, and as happened to a friend of mine recently, she ended up with a job that actually was her perfect job. So yeah, things can turn out for the better. So mindset and how you approach things and looking for the positive it makes a massive difference.
I agree with that, and I think what you said in terms of mindset, it's quite important. And I think what's quite important is people need to reframe the way they think about things, because like you said, there is a silver lining at the end of the day, but we tend to look at the negative rather than the silver lining. So for me, it would be to say, if I have to reframe this, how would I reframe this? And it would be in terms of, what would I like the outcome to be? And visualize in terms of what that outcome is going to be. Sit down and write down in terms of what's the advantages and what's the disadvantages. And in terms of what's the impact it's going to have on me. And then look at in terms of the positives that's come out of that. And say, fine, this is opportunities I'm going to get out of it. And then go with that. Yes, we're not always going to look at the glass as being half full. Sometimes we're going to look at the glass as being half empty. But what's going to be quite important is going to be in terms of, how do I reframe that negativity into positive? And it comes to the mindset that you said, but it's not always easy. So what advice do you give to people in terms of, I'll give an example. So a few years back, when I went through a restructuring at a company, I sat there and I thought, oh my goodness, am I going to lose my job? I couldn't think further than, is there going to be a role for me? And does it mean I'm going to have to take a step back, which I did not want to do? And I struggled to move away from that mindset. And I think I sit there and now I know what to do because I've got the tools. But for somebody who doesn't know the tools and they're sitting in that situation, how could they move themselves away from that process? In your experience, what have you advised?
Yeah, I think talking to somebody, and I mean, you mentioned finding a coach earlier, talking to somebody else to actually help you through the thinking process of where you're at, and looking at opportunities is a great thing to think about. Finding somebody that can help you think about what your experience is, what your strengths are, looking at opportunities about, well, what's what job would I like to do? Are there any courses that I can go on that would help me upskill? But also really taking care of yourself personally as well. It is really, really stressful. And there's all sorts of techniques that you can do to help de-stress. It's really, really important when you're stressed to really, really take care of your well-being generally. Because what happens when the body gets stressed, all of those prehistoric reactions happen, and all the hormones flood into the body. And it's all about, when you're stressed, it's all about that reaction that's sort of getting away from danger, which serves us very well in prehistoric times. But in modern times, you're looking at sort of the adrenals constantly on high alert, the body are constantly on high alert. And one of the things that happens, it actually drains blood away from the brain, because it's all about getting away from danger. And so you want to do things that actually help you reverse all of those reactions, get the blood pumping around the body, actually sending really good signals to the body to actually calm down. And one of the things that's really good is doing the things that you love. So making sure that you're having you time. That doesn't matter if it's going to the cinema, taking a walk, doing some gardening, doing arts and crafts. So physical exercise is really good. That sends really great signals to the body to help you calm down. What are some of your things? What do you do to de-stress?
So what I do to de-stress is that I make sure I have my weekends to myself. I know as a business owner, we think we have to be 24/7 working on the business. But if we don't take time out for ourselves, then we're going to eventually come to a point where we're going to have burnout. And I realized that quite early on. I cannot do everything myself. And I think when we start out as a sole business, ultimately we sit there and we think, I don't have the budget for somebody else to come in and do this for me. And so I take on all of these tasks thinking I've got to do all of this on my own. And that's where the stress comes, that's where the overwhelm comes. And that's for me a major change, because I've left the security of a monthly salaried job, and now I'm going into my business where I don't have a guaranteed income. And I've got to make things work. So obviously I'm going to sit and count the pennies. However, I took a step back and I said, what is it that I need to do? So some of the things is make a list of what was it that I really didn't like doing in my business, and what was it that I was not good at doing. So one of them was, I'm going to have to do my annual financials that will have to be submitted. So I hand that all over to my accountant, and they see to that for me, and so I don't have to worry about it. I just make sure my invoices and my receipts and things get submitted to them, so that they take care of that for me. In terms of some of the admin work, I outsource that to someone who can take care of that for me as well. So that frees me up in terms of, now I can focus in terms of what I need to do. But also more importantly, I think for me it was the time I freed up was X amount times pounds, which I can focus on income coming into the business instead of time being taken up by something else. So that took some of the stress away, knowing I'm getting income, because I freed up time to do it that way from that perspective. Other things that I do to de-stress is I journal quite a bit. So if I'm having a day in terms of where I feel I'm spiraling downwards, I will sit down and, like you say, try and see, am I making a big thing about this, or whether it's just a small aspect. And I do find, though, is that my personal life does have an impact within the work environment, and you cannot say the two are separate from each other, especially if you're running your own business. So I find that I have to take care of things in my personal life, and that will then have a domino effect within the business itself from that perspective. So that's what I do. If and when I grow my business, something I have been thinking about and something I have advised other clients to look at, is, for me, I think well-being is a very, very important aspect in any business. And it's to look at in terms of how can I show my employees that I care about them. And one of my clients, she is also within the well-being space, but what she does is she offers services in terms of going into businesses, and they have a well-being day, so they do massages.
Okay.
They offer yoga classes, so during lunchtime or immediately after work, people can go to those classes. They can sign up during the day in terms of going for a massage. And this company gives her the space to be able to do that, to give that service to the employees. And I think that's a good model. So that's something I would definitely look into, and I have advised my other clients to look into it as well. Because from that perspective, you're also showing your employees that you care about the well-being, but also they've got a space in terms of where they can just go away for that 15 to 20 minutes and think about something else than what's happening in their personal life or on their desk they need to get back to.
And that's so key, isn't it, from an employer's perspective when change is happening, to make sure that people have other things and support in other ways. But as a sole trader, obviously you're not going to get those benefits because there's just you. So
exactly,
as a sole trader, it's really important to make sure that you're doing those things for yourself. You're actually getting out, you're getting some exercise. It's very easy when there's anxiety and stress, because there's a bit of a change overload, to actually work longer hours, especially when you're self-employed. And it's really important to take some time out. It's really important to look after your nutrition, to support yourself. When there's only you in the business, it's so important to stay as healthy as you can be, because if you can't work in the business, then the chances are there's nobody else that can pick up. And you can overdo it really easily and get to burnout. So making sure that you're adapting to change, that you've got the right support networks in place, that you're talking to people, but also doing things that support you, that are fun, that actually improve your own well-being, that you're enhancing your creativity or doing your hobbies or spending time with friends and family, all of those sorts of things that nourish you and all those people around you that are the people that you can talk to about what's going on in your life, and make sure you've got somebody around that can just help you get a bit of perspective.
That's quite important. Oh, I see we've got a question.
Okay, I always assume the worst is going to happen. How do I change my mindset? That's a really good question, Paveen. Thank you for that. One of the key things is to really understand where you're at. So for any change to happen, you really need to know where your starting point is. And one of the things that Rayana said earlier, about journaling is really, really useful to actually be able to look internally and see where you're at, what your mindset is. So start to do things like, say for example, if you find a particular situation stressful, start to make a really short journal, and it doesn't have to be pen and paper. You know, we've all got, smartphones these days. It's really easy to get an app to do journaling on. It doesn't matter where you do it. You can also record messages. There's apps like Mental Snap where you can record your mental state. The important thing is to actually have that inward reflection and start to look at, okay, I got a bit anxious about that. What was the trigger? And then start to look at, well, was it something external? Was it something that I didn't understand? Was it that I didn't have enough information? Was it me reacting to somebody else? And just really understand what the triggers are and what makes you feel that the worst is going to happen in the first place. Once you've done that journaling, you'll start to understand and dig under your own hood a little bit as to what makes you tick and what actually puts you into that We like to call it sort of catastrophizing, where you always think the worst is going to happen. And then you can start taking steps to think about, well, actually, is that really the case? And things like CBT are really good for helping you step back and going through the process of, well, have I been in this situation before where I worried about something?
Yes.
Did it actually happen? Yes or no? And you go through the process where you drill down and you realise, well, actually, we spend an awful lot of time worrying about things that actually may happen. But the important thing is that they probably won't. And so looking at it from that perspective, it takes time. If you're a natural worrier or you have a natural tendency to think the worst will happen if you're a glass half empty person, it takes practice to think about, how do I change that mindset? And it is a choice. And it's hard work. And it's habit forming to actually look internally and take that time to self-reflect and then make choices about what it is that needs to change and how to change. And as we said earlier, getting help is really, really important. So thank you for that. Something else I like to do as well, that Rihanna and I were talking about before we started the session, I find meditation actually really helps. It's not for everybody, and there's different forms of meditation, but I find that quiet space meditation for me isn't about silencing the mind completely. It's just taking that time to really go internal and just do that deep breathing. Deep breathing in itself sends the right signals to the brain that it's easy to calm down. And it's finding what works for you, whether that's meditation or whether that's, walking in nature. And quite often I get aha moments if I've done some journaling and I've looked at some particular behaviour that I want to change. After a meditation session, I'll quite often get an aha moment about what I can do differently.
Because what I also tend to do is, as you know, I just live close to the Olympic Park. So that's my space that I go and I just walk, and it gives me a different... So I take myself out of the space I've been in and put myself into a new environment. And that I find changes the way I think about things and the way I see things. But I also tend to think back on in terms of what would my dad have advised me with regard to this, because he was, I would say, my mentor, and I used to go to him for advice things, and I would then ask that question and I'd come up with the answer, funny enough in terms of this is actually what the solution would be from that perspective. But I also tend to ask myself, if I find that my behavior leads to certain patterns, and it's continuous patterns, as you mentioned when you journal, then I'll ask myself, what purpose is this behavior serving me? So what's the reason that I'm continuously doing this? So it's giving me some kind of satisfaction.
Yes.
And why am I doing it? What's that trigger that you were talking about in terms of why do I do this constantly, that I'm getting the same behavior, but it's a negative behavior, and actually it's not serving me, but I think it is serving me. So I would also ask a question in terms of, what purpose is this behavior serving me, and go look at it from that perspective, and you'll be amazed what comes out.